It was just another quiet morning at St. Vincent Hospital. Nurses sipped their coffee, patients were being checked in, and the halls echoed with the usual rhythm of a hospital starting its day. But everything changed in an instant when a ragged stray dog burst through the front doors, dragging a torn black garbage bag in his mouth. At first, there was panic, people screamed, security was called, but amidst the chaos, no one noticed the bag was moving. What lay inside would stun everyone. This is not just a story about a dog. It's about an act of unthinkable courage, a life on the brink, and a moment that would bind 3 lost souls forever. It began like any other early morning at St. Vincent Hospital. The sky outside was still tinted with shades of gray, the quiet hum of machines blending with the soft footsteps of nurses starting their rounds. Inside the lobby, the receptionist flipped through patient charts while a janitor mopped silently in the corner. Everything felt routine, until the doors burst open with a loud, startling clang. A stray dog stood there, his fur matted and damp from the rain, ribs faintly visible beneath a layer of dirt and age. In his mouth, he clutched a large black garbage bag, torn and soaked, dragging just above the tiled floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then came a shout, followed by another. Someone screamed. The dog's sudden appearance triggered instant panic. A nurse knocked over a clipboard. A guard reached for his radio. Everyone assumed the worst. But the dog didn't growl. He didn't bark. His eyes, tired yet focused, scanned the room urgently. His paws slipped slightly as he began to walk forward, head lowered, tail still. The bag swung gently, and for just a second, something inside it shifted. No one noticed. All they saw was an unwanted animal trespassing in a sterile place of order. A receptionist rushed toward him, waving her arms to scare him off. The dog flinched but held tight to the bag, backing away before turning and bolting down the corridor, heart pounding, body aching, driven by something far deeper than instinct. He had no words, no way to explain, but he knew he had to get help. And he was running out of time. 2 hours before his desperate dash into the hospital, the world had still been asleep. The city was shrouded in a quiet, damp gloom, the streets slick with early rain and the air thick with the scent of mildew and exhaust. For most, it was a time of rest. But for the stray dog, this hour was part of his daily ritual, a slow, aching march through back alleys and trash-littered corners in search of whatever scraps might keep him alive one more day. He had no collar, no tag, and no name that anyone remembered. He had become a ghost that roamed the streets, thin, weathered, invisible. People had thrown things at him. Children laughed and ran, while adults yelled or crossed the street. Doors had been slammed in his face more times than he could count. There were no soft beds, no bowls of food waiting, no hands reaching out in affection. Only cold sidewalks and distant memories of what warmth might have once felt like. But on that cold morning, as the sky barely began to lighten, he found himself behind the crumbling brick bakery near the river. It had been a reliable place for spoiled pastries or half-eaten sandwiches. His paws, cracked and raw, carried him slowly across puddles until he reached the pile of garbage dumped behind the shop. He moved without thinking, nose to the ground, instincts dull but persistent. And then he stopped. Amid the trash and broken boxes lay a black garbage bag. Torn. Lopsided. It wasn't the shape that made him freeze, it was the smell. A strange, sharp scent that stirred something ancient in his bones. It wasn't the reek of old meat or the sourness of milk. It was life. Faint, fragile, and wrong. He sniffed again, ears pricking. The bag moved. He edged closer, heart thudding. One cautious nudge with his snout tore open a corner. What he saw made him reel back with a soft whimper. A baby. Tiny. Limp. A bare wisp of life. Its skin was pale and waxy, lips a purplish blue, eyes closed. A stillness clung to it that felt unnatural. Death was hovering nearby, he could feel it, the way animals do. But something else sparked in him then. A ripple of instinct, yes, but deeper than that. A memory, maybe. Or a longing. Or simply the refusal to let this small, helpless creature disappear into the shadows, like he had so many years ago. He didn't understand hospitals or human medicine. He didn't know words like hypothermia or abandonment. But he remembered a place. A building with clean windows and the smell of bleach and human sorrow. He remembered seeing people rushing in and out, carrying boxes and babies. Once, years ago, someone in white had looked at him, really looked, and tossed him a crust of bread. That memory alone became his direction. With shaking jaws, he took the bag carefully in his mouth. It was heavier than he expected. The plastic tore a little, but he tightened his grip and began to walk. Not for food. Not for safety. But for something far greater. The streets were long and the pain in his legs returned quickly. Every few steps, he paused to adjust the bag, to make sure the tiny life inside hadn't stopped moving. Each breath felt like a mile. Each gust of wind threatened to snatch away his fragile burden. But he pushed on, limping, dragging, determined. He was astray. Forgotten. Broken. But in that moment, he was something else, a messenger. A guardian. A creature answering a call that no one else had heard. And the baby was still alive. Toby's weary legs carried him forward, each step a testament to his determination. The streets behind him seemed a world away, their cold, unfeeling pavement replaced by the sterile, gleaming tiles of the hospital corridor. Every instinct in his body screamed to stop, to turn around and retreat to the shadows he knew so well, but the baby, he couldn't turn his back on that fragile, vulnerable life. The coldness of the plastic bag still clung to his teeth, a painful reminder of how far he had come, how much he had endured just to bring the baby here. Toby's body was trembling from exhaustion, his legs aching, but his focus never wavered. He didn't understand the building he was now in or the people rushing around him. He only knew that he had to keep moving, that the child inside the bag needed help, needed life. The automatic doors to the hospital entrance slid open with a hiss, but to Toby, it was like the gates of salvation. His eyes scanned the chaos before him, nurses running, doctors barking orders, machines beeping. The place was alive with urgency, but none of it seemed to matter to him. He was driven by a single, unrelenting thought: the baby must survive. Toby hesitated only for a second, then darted through the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. A receptionist looked up with wide, startled eyes. She recoiled at the sight of him, hands raised in defense, shouting for him to leave. He paused for a moment, as if sensing the tension in the air, the energy of fear and uncertainty. But Toby wasn't afraid, he didn't even have the time to be. His mission was clear, and he knew that no matter how hard the world pushed him away, he had to go forward. Ignoring the woman's shout, Toby pressed on, his paws clicking sharply against the polished floors, echoing down the long hallway. He could feel the weight of the bag in his mouth, now slick with sweat from his tight grip, but he didn't care. Every step brought him closer to his goal, and nothing would stop him now. As he rounded a corner, he saw a staff lounge ahead. 3 nurses sat, chatting casually. 2 of them stood up immediately, waving their arms, their faces twisted in irritation. "Get out," one of them shouted, but Toby didn't flinch. His gaze wasn't on them, wasn't focused on their angry gestures. His attention was locked on something else, something softer. Among the chaos, one nurse, a young woman named Erin Walker, stepped forward. Her eyes met his, and something in her expression shifted. She didn't recoil. She didn't wave him away. Instead, she watched him with quiet intensity, her gaze softening. Toby saw it in her eyes, an understanding, a recognition. He wasn't just a stray, just an animal running wild. To her, he was something more. His breath was labored, his body trembling with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. His instincts pushed him forward. He lowered his head, gently releasing the black plastic bag from his mouth. It fell softly to the ground at her feet. The world seemed to slow as Erin knelt down, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the bag. When she opened it, the world seemed to stop. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she laid eyes on the baby, its tiny body, its blue lips, its lifeless form. It was barely breathing, struggling to cling to life, and in that moment, Erin's world tilted. She didn't need to see the baby's face to know how dire the situation was. She didn't need to be a doctor to understand that time was running out. Without thinking, Erin called out for help, her voice clear but filled with urgency. "Code Blue. We need a crash team, now." Her hands worked quickly, checking the baby's pulse, her heart racing as she tried to steady her breathing. She could hear the sound of feet pounding down the hall, of voices shouting orders, but all that mattered was the tiny life in front of her. And Toby. The dog. He hadn't moved. He stayed by her side, his eyes never leaving the baby. His body was exhausted, his fur matted and dirty, but there was a determination in his gaze. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. He had done what he came to do, and now, he was part of this moment. Part of this fight for life. As the crash team arrived and took over, Erin couldn't tear her eyes away from the dog. She had seen many patients in her career, many moments of life and death, but something about Toby's presence struck her. There was something in the way he looked at her, something deep and ancient, as if he understood the gravity of what had just transpired. Erin leaned down, her hand trembling as she extended it toward the dog. Slowly, cautiously, Toby turned his head and allowed her touch. The moment was quiet, intimate. When her fingers brushed against his fur, a soft, almost imperceptible shudder ran through him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt warmth, real warmth. The kind of warmth he had been denied for so long. Toby's journey had not been a simple one. It hadn't been about finding food or shelter. It had been about something far more profound, something he couldn't put into words, something far beyond his understanding. But in this moment, in the soft pressure of Erin's hand against his head, he felt seen. For the first time, he was not just a stray dog. He was a hero. Days melted into weeks, but to Toby, it felt like he was living in a dream. Every morning, he would wait patiently by the door, watching Erin move through her morning routine. His eyes, once filled with caution and mistrust, had softened over time. He now saw Erin's smile and her kind touch not as foreign gestures but as a promise, of safety, of warmth, of belonging. For a dog who had spent nearly a decade surviving on the cold streets, this new life was unfathomable. But now, Toby was not just a stray dog anymore. He was part of something. Every step of this journey felt surreal, like each day was a chapter of an unfolding story. The life he had once known, loneliness, hunger, fear, was so far removed from the one he now experienced with Erin and Emma. The bond between them grew, deepening with each shared moment. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about companionship, trust, and love. Toby had become Erin's shadow. Wherever she went, he followed. When she went into the kitchen to prepare meals, Toby sat quietly by her feet, his gaze never straying far from her. When she worked on the couch or at her desk, he would curl up beside her, content with just being in her presence. He had learned to trust her, not just because of her kindness but because of how deeply she cared for him, how she respected him as more than a stray, as more than just a dog. But the bond that Toby shared with Emma was even more profound. He had saved her life, yes, but it was something deeper than that. It was as though, in saving her, he had found his own salvation. Every time Erin cradled the little girl in her arms, Toby would gently nudge the baby's crib with his nose, watching over her with an unwavering protectiveness. The first time Emma made eye contact with him, her tiny, innocent gaze met his, and something inside Toby seemed to shift. He stayed beside her at every moment, always alert, always attentive. The bond between them seemed to speak of something older than time, as though they had always been meant to find each other. Toby no longer had to prove his loyalty. He knew, in his heart, that his purpose was to protect Emma, to ensure that she lived the life she deserved. One particular afternoon, Toby sat by Emma's crib, as he always did. The room was peaceful, the soft hum of the baby monitor in the background. He watched Emma stir, her little hands twitching in the air, as though she was reaching for something. Toby's ears perked up at the soft sounds she made, almost like a call, a soft cry that tugged at something deep inside him. His instincts kicked in, urging him to protect her, to be near her, to comfort her. Erin stepped into the room, her heart swelling with love for both of her charges. She smiled at Toby, who was watching Emma intently. "She's growing up so fast," Erin whispered to herself, but her words were lost in the air as she knelt beside the crib. Just as she did, Emma's tiny hands reached toward Toby. It wasn't the first time Emma had reached out for him, but this time was different. This time, there was recognition in her eyes. Toby's heart beat faster as he stepped forward, his gentle muzzle brushing Emma's small hand. There was something about her touch that made him feel like his heart was whole again. His past, the harshness of the streets, the days of starvation and pain, faded into nothing as he stood there, watching Emma's fingers wrap around his paw. Toby allowed her to touch him, staying still and calm. The connection was instant, an unspoken understanding between them. It was as if Emma knew that he had been there for her, even before she could comprehend it. Toby had been the one to save her, to bring her into the light, and now she was reaching out to him as though he were the only one who could offer her comfort. Erin, who had been watching the exchange, felt tears welling in her eyes. She had always known that Toby was special, but seeing this connection between him and Emma was something she could never have imagined. It was a bond that transcended language, a deep, pure understanding that spoke louder than words. It was the bond of guardianship, of love, of lives saved and healed. As Toby sat beside Emma, his tail gently thumping the floor, Erin knelt down beside him. Her fingers brushed through his fur, and for the first time, Toby felt no fear, no uncertainty. He had given up everything for this family, and it had been worth it. Erin whispered softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "You saved her, Toby. And now, you've saved us all." Toby's heart swelled with something he had never known before. He had never imagined a life where he wasn't a lonely survivor, chasing scraps in the streets. But now, in this quiet room, surrounded by the warmth of the family he had helped create, Toby finally understood. He was no longer a stray. He was home. And as the evening sun set, casting a golden glow over the room, Toby lay by Emma's crib, his eyes drifting shut in contentment. He had found what he had always been searching for. Not just a place to sleep or a full belly, but a family. His family. Months passed, and Toby's transformation was not just a physical one. It was a profound emotional shift, as if the stray dog had stepped into a new world where kindness and love were no longer foreign concepts. His life, once harsh and unforgiving, began to feel like it had purpose. He had spent years wandering the cold streets, learning not to trust, not to care. People had only ever been a source of pain and rejection for him. Yet, in Aaron's home, everything was different. Toby had come to learn the rhythm of the house, the sound of Emma's laughter echoing down the halls, the smell of fresh food cooking, the warmth of a gentle hand reaching out to him, offering care and comfort. He had never known tenderness like this, and it was a revelation. With each passing day, Toby grew more attached to the people who had shown him what it meant to truly belong. His fur, once dull and tangled from neglect, was now glossy and soft, the result of Aaron's patient grooming. His once deep mistrust of humans was slowly replaced by a quiet, comforting sense of security. But it wasn't just the physical changes that were so evident. It was the way Toby had bonded with Emma. The little girl, who had once been so fragile, so close to the edge of life, was now full of energy and life. Her eyes sparkled with wonder, her laughter was like music in the house, and Toby was always there, watching over her with a vigilance that was nothing short of heroic. He had an uncanny ability to know when Emma needed him. When she cried, his ears would perk up, his tail would stiffen, and he would trot over to her side, nudging her gently with his nose or sitting nearby, always ready to offer comfort. When she was happy, Toby was right there, his tail wagging, his eyes bright, sharing in the joy of the moment. Aaron watched this bond with a deep sense of awe. She had never imagined that a dog, of all creatures, would have such an intuitive understanding of her daughter's needs. Sometimes, when Emma's tiny hands reached out to him, her fingers curling into his fur, Toby would look at her with such tenderness that it seemed as though he was trying to convey a message, a silent promise that he would always protect her. It was as if Toby, once astray, had found a new calling, a new purpose, in caring for the little girl who had been saved from the edge of death. Erin herself had changed, too. The lonely woman she had once been, uncertain of her place in the world, had become a mother in every sense of the word. She had learned the depth of her own strength, the capacity for love that she never knew she had. Toby had been there for her through it all. He had been her rock, her constant companion. She often found herself gazing at him late at night, his warm body curled up at her feet, the sound of his gentle breathing filling the silence of the house. He had not only saved Emma's life, but he had also saved Aaron from the isolation and heartbreak that had once seemed inescapable. One evening, as Aaron sat by the window, watching the sunset, Toby walked over to her. His movements were slow, deliberate, and there was something different about the way he approached her this time. His eyes were soft, filled with a mixture of affection and something deeper, something almost protective. He stood in front of her and gently placed his head in her lap, as if seeking comfort, seeking reassurance. Aaron looked down at him, her heart swelling with emotion. This dog, this once forlorn creature, had become her closest companion, her confidant. She had never imagined that a dog could have such a profound impact on her life. And yet, here he was, her guardian, her friend, her protector. "You've been my hero, Toby," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her feelings. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. For saving Emma, for saving me." Toby lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes reflecting the love he had come to feel for her. His tail thumped gently on the floor in response, a simple gesture, but one that carried more meaning than words could convey. Aaron reached down and stroked his fur, the warmth of his body comforting her in ways that words could not express. But even as life in the household blossomed with the vibrancy of new beginnings, there were moments when Toby's past seemed to seep through the cracks in his calm demeanor. Late at night, when the house was quiet, and Emma was asleep, Toby would sit by the window, staring out into the darkness, as if waiting for something that he could never quite name. There was a sadness in his eyes, a deep-seated weariness that had been born from years of hardship. Aaron noticed it, of course. She had seen that look in his eyes before, a reflection of the pain and loneliness he had carried with him from the streets. She knew that it wasn't something that could be easily healed, but she also knew that he had found a place where he could finally rest, a place where he could be loved. She had come to understand that Toby, despite all his bravery, was still haunted by his past, just as she had once been. On Emma's first birthday, Erin sat quietly by herself, holding the little girl in her arms. She watched as Toby, ever loyal, lay at her feet, his eyes fixated on Emma with the same tenderness he had shown from the first moment they had met. A year had passed, and so much had changed. Emma was no longer the fragile baby they had rushed into the hospital, and Toby was no longer the stray dog who had wandered the streets. They were a family now, bound by love, by sacrifice, and by the quiet acts of bravery that had brought them all together. "Happy birthday, Emma," Erin whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "You've brought so much joy into our lives. And Toby is the reason you're here. The reason we have this family." Emma giggled, her little fingers reaching up to touch her mother's face. Toby looked up, his tail thumping gently on the floor. For a brief moment, Erin felt as though the weight of the past had been lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment that only love could bring. And as Emma's giggles filled the room, Toby's eyes softened, his heart content. He had found his place, his purpose. He had found love. The kind of love that healed, that protected, that made him whole again. 3 months later, the once abandoned dog named Max lay peacefully on a warm rug inside a loving home. The woman who had seen through his eyes, Nurse Emily Walker, sat beside him, cradling a baby now full of life, laughter, and light. That same baby who, not long ago, had been discarded like trash. But thanks to Max, he had been given a second chance. In that small living room, a new family had formed, built not by blood, but by bravery, compassion, and fate. Because sometimes, the most powerful heroes don't wear uniforms or capes, they simply show up when no one else will, with nothing but love and a little hope.